Welcome to another quiet journey into the past, a soft-spoken stroll through the forgotten, the curious, and sometimes the strangely soothing moments in human history. Tonight's story is about a time when winter wasn't just a season. It was a challenge to survive. Imagine a world with no central heating, no insulated windows, no electric blankets, no hot showers waiting in a tiled bathroom, no cozy fleece hoodies or radiators humming in the night. Just you, the cold, and whatever clever ideas humanity had come up with to stay warm without modern tools. This is boring history for sleep. And tonight we're exploring how people managed winter without modern tools. Before we begin, I invite you to get comfortable. Let your body relax and your breath slow. And as you listen, try to picture the scenes. Candlelight flickering, snow brushing gently against wooden shutters, frost creeping across the edges of a clay cup of warm broth. A quiet world, a simpler time. And don't forget, please watch until the end, and in the comments below, let us know how you're feeling right now. Calm, cozy, curious. We read every single one. Your thoughts are part of this story too. Now let's begin. Long before modern cities buzzed with electricity, winter was a test of resilience and adaptation. In early human settlements, think 10,000 years ago during the Neolithic period, surviving the winter meant making peace with darkness, scarcity, and freezing temperatures. There were no heaters, no weather apps, just instinct, nature, and ingenuity. People built homes not just for shelter but as heat traps. In colder regions, dwellings were often dug into the earth, half buried, like dens. These are called pit houses. By digging down, ancient people used the natural insulation of the soil to protect themselves from wind and frost. The entrances were small, sometimes so low you had to crawl inside. But once you were in, it was significantly warmer. Fires burned in central hearths, and smoke escaped through tiny roof holes or cracks. The smoke filled the air with a smell of ash and warmth, irritating to the eyes, yes, but better than frost-bitten fingers. In some Arctic and subarctic cultures, like those of the Inuit, winter shelters were crafted from snow itself. Igloos, elegant domes of packed snow blocks, were not just symbols of adaptation but incredible feats of engineering. Snow, though cold, is an excellent insulator. Inside an igloo, body heat and a small oil lamp could raise the interior temperature dramatically, sometimes to the mid-60s Fahrenheit, even when the world outside was a frozen tundra. Sleeping furs lined the floors, and people slept together, often in groups, to share warmth. But not all winters were met with snow domes or pit houses. In medieval Europe, families often lived in single-room homes made of timber, mud, or stone. When the cold arrived, the entire household, parents, children, even livestock, huddled in that one room. Livestock brought body heat, and their waste, though unpleasant, added another layer of insulation on cold stone floors. Curtains were hung not just over windows but around beds to hold in warmth. People wore nightcaps not for fashion but because losing heat through the head was very real, especially when the fire had burned out and your only blanket was a coarse wool sheet. And people didn't just live through winter. They prepared for it all year long. In the spring and summer, food was grown and gathered, not only for daily sustenance, but for storage. Drying meat, preserving root vegetables in underground cellars, storing grains in clay pots sealed with wax or fat. Every harvest was a race, against time, against the coming frost. In the evenings, people would sit near the fire and tell stories. Oral tradition was strong in these times, and winter nights were often filled with whispered legends, lullabies, and superstitions. There was little else to do once darkness fell. Candles were expensive, oil was scarce. So families relied on each other, their voices, their songs, their shared warmth. Some cultures embraced seasonal sleep patterns. Before the industrial era and artificial light, people didn't sleep the way we do now. In many parts of the world, they practiced segmented sleep, two distinct chunks of sleep, broken by a gentle waking period in the middle of the night. During this quiet interlude, people prayed, read, reflected, or simply added more wood to the fire. Winter clothing was also a matter of function over form. Layers were key. Wool tunics, linen undergarments, and cloaks made of thick, oiled leather helped trap body heat. In some regions, people lined their shoes with hay or moss, fur-lined mittens, wool-wrapped legs. Every piece of clothing had a purpose, and often it was passed down from generation to generation, patched and mended until it fell apart. So much of winter survival was about patience and preparation. Time moved slower. People listened to the wind, studied the stars, and watched the animals. If the birds left early, it meant the cold would come sooner. If the squirrels hid more acorns, it meant the winter would be longer. The natural world spoke, and those who listened were the ones who made it to spring. And as you listen to these quiet echoes of the past, remember, winter was not something to conquer, it was something to endure, something to respect, and sometimes something to fear. As we continue our quiet journey into the depths of history, let's leave behind the snow-covered cottages and firelit caves of Part 1 and slowly open the door to a broader view of how people from different parts of the world braved the cold. Tonight, we glide gently through time, across continents, cultures, and centuries, to see how human beings lived through long, brutal winters without even a whisper of electricity. Close your eyes, if you haven't already. The only thing you need to do now is rest. Let the past unfold in your mind like a flickering lantern in the dark. Imagine now the rolling hills of ancient China, 1,000 years before central heating. In colder regions, families relied on something called a kang, a heated platform, bed built of brick or stone. Beneath the kang, flues from a nearby stove or fireplace carried hot air, gently warming the entire platform. In the evenings, after meals, the family would gather on the kang to talk, read, or simply sit in silence as the warmth seeped into their bones. Later, they would sleep there, shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in thick quilts made of cotton and silk, stuffed with whatever natural fibers they could find. The kang wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was the center of the home, physically and emotionally. It was where people laughed, cried, and waited for winter to pass. Children listened to elders' tales. Couples shared whispered dreams. It was warm, yes, but also deeply human. Travel. Westward now, across mountains and plains to the Middle East, where winters in high-altitude deserts brought freezing nights, even if days were sunny. Traditional homes were designed with thermal mass in mind. Thick mud brick or stone walls absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly at night. Courtyards were narrow, windows small, and ceilings high. These architectural details helped regulate temperature naturally. In the absence of heaters, people relied on clay stoves, called tannours or taboons, not only for cooking but also for gentle ambient heat. In wealthier homes, carpets and cushions lined every inch of the floor, adding not only comfort but insulation. These textiles weren't just decoration. They were warmth, stitched by hand, often passed down through generations. Slippers were thick, sometimes leather-lined with wool or felt. Bed covers were layered, and clothes were loose yet heavy, allowing warm air to stay trapped close to the body. Further north, in Scandinavia and the northern steppes of Russia, life was an entirely different kind of cold. Temperatures dipped to terrifying lows. Here, communal heating and rituals helped people survive. The sauna, known in Finnish as the savusauna, was not just a place to wash, but a way to cleanse the body and warm the soul. After working all day in the icy fields or forests, families would gather in these simple wooden steam rooms, heated by stones placed in a central stove. The heat was intense, not just physical, but spiritual. The sweat, the steam, the silence. For some, it was the only time they truly felt warm all winter. Inside their homes, Scandinavian people used double walls, thick rugs, and central hearths to fight the cold. Furniture was often pushed against inner walls, avoiding outer ones that grew too cold to touch. Beds were often built into the wall itself, like little wooden caves, to preserve warmth. People slept under heavy down-filled duvets, and if you were lucky, your feet might be wrapped in fur. Firewood was precious. It had to be chopped and stacked in the warmer months, not just for one fire, but for months of fires. A single winter could burn through entire stacks. Gathering firewood wasn't just a chore, it was survival. In feudal Japan, people used hibachi, small portable containers filled with hot charcoal, to warm themselves in the absence of central heat. In some homes, kotatsu tables became the heart of winter life. A kotatsu was a low table with a heat source underneath, covered with a thick blanket. People would sit around it with their legs tucked under, letting the warmth rise. Children did homework there. Elders drank tea. Life happened slowly and quietly around the kotatsu, a bubble of comfort in a sea of chill. Winters were endured, not enjoyed, but they were also deeply communal. People leaned on each other, literally, to stay warm. Sleep was not solitary, it was shared. Warmth was not a commodity, it was a gift. In the British Isles, long before modern heating, people relied on peat, blocks of compressed vegetation, to fuel fires. Peat burned slow and long, and its earthy smoke filled homes with a musty smell. In castles, massive hearths blazed through the night. In cottages, fires were small but constant. People wore sleeping gowns, wool stockings, and nightcaps, and often carried bed warmers, metal pans filled with hot coals, to heat their sheets before crawling in. But even with all this, rooms were still cold. Windows rattled. Frost formed inside. So people adjusted. They didn't expect warmth everywhere. They simply sought it wherever it could be found. Even something as simple as sleep changed in winter. People went to bed earlier, not because they were more tired, but because daylight was shorter, candles were limited, and there wasn't much else to do. Morning came slowly. The fire was restarted. The ice on the inside of windows melted. The rituals began again. And through it all, humans endured, wrapped in wool, sharing bread, telling stories. Each winter was different, but the goal was always the same: make it to spring. Let us continue this peaceful journey through time as we drift further into the world of ancient winters. The fires of memory glow gently around us, casting soft shadows on the walls of history. There's no rush here, only the slow unfolding of how people, in their quiet determination, greeted the coldest season with patience and ingenuity. Now let your mind wander to the forests of medieval Europe, where thick snow blanketed the land and icy winds curled through the wooden beams of every home. The walls of peasant cottages were often made from wattle and daub, branches interwoven and plastered with a mixture of mud, straw, and dung. These materials, humble as they were, had insulating properties. They kept out the worst of the chill, especially when covered with tapestries, furs, or layers of cloth. Inside, the hearth was the soul of the home. The fire rarely went out. It was kept alive with careful tending, banked with ashes at night, so it would smolder rather than extinguish. In the morning, a few puffs of breath and some kindling would coax the flame back to life. Fire was not merely warmth. It was life, light, food, and security, all in one flickering glow. Meals were planned around the fire: porridge, soups, stews, dishes that could simmer for hours and warm both belly and room. Bread was baked in communal ovens or over coals, and it lasted longer in the cold. Root vegetables were stored in cellars, where the ground's natural. Insulation protected them from freezing. Salted meats hung from rafters, preserved through time-honored methods. Everything about winter was a dance with time: preparation, preservation, endurance. When it came time to sleep, people used what they had: hay stuffed into mattress sacks, animal skins layered beneath and above. Wealthier families might have feather beds, but even these didn't shield them entirely from the chill that crept in during the darkest hours of the night. So they layered: wool blankets, linen sheets, furs, sometimes as many as 6 or 7 layers held down by the weight of sleep and survival. And people did not sleep alone. Families slept in close quarters, even in a single bed if space required it. Body heat was one of the most effective insulators. Children huddled next to parents, siblings beside siblings, grandparents wrapped in their own special quilts. Even animals, dogs, cats, goats, might be brought inside during especially cold nights, not just to protect them, but to share their warmth. Clothing adapted as well. In many parts of Europe, winter underwear was made of thick wool or linen. Outer garments included tunics, cloaks, hoods, and gloves sewn from scraps. Woolen hats were worn indoors. Feet were wrapped in cloth or stuffed into boots lined with straw. It wasn't elegant, but it was enough. Now imagine the Inuit peoples of the Arctic Circle, masters of surviving in the harshest cold known to humankind. Their lives were shaped entirely by the rhythms of the ice. They lived in igloos, domes of packed snow, which might seem cold, but snow is an extraordinary insulator. Inside, temperatures could remain just below freezing, even when the outside world dropped far below zero. They wore clothing crafted from caribou hides, sewn with painstaking care using sinew thread and bone needles. These garments were not just warm, they were expertly designed, windproof, layered, and incredibly effective. Boots were lined with fur, gloves were double-layered, hoods were deep. Every inch of skin was protected, every layer built for survival. Cooking was done using seal oil lamps, which also provided light and heat. Families slept together on raised platforms covered in furs. The air might be cold, but they were warm beneath the skins of the animals they depended on. These were not people living against nature. They lived with it. They knew its moods. They listened to the winds. They watched the stars. They understood the snow. Across the globe, in the Andes Mountains, the Quechua and Aymara peoples braved winter with high-altitude wisdom. Their homes were constructed from adobe and stone, and thick woolen ponchos known as mantas kept their bodies warm. They raised alpacas and llamas, not just for transport or food, but for their thick, insulating fiber, which was spun into yarn and woven into blankets and clothing. At night, families might sleep on raised platforms or in corners of the room, shielded from wind, huddled together, wrapped in layers of woven wool. Like so many others throughout history, they greeted the cold not with fear, but with preparation, resilience, and unity. And across every culture, we see the same pattern: adaptation, simplicity, a profound intimacy with the natural world. There were no electric heaters, no thermal socks, no down jackets, just wool, wood, fire, stone, and human togetherness. These ancient winters were quieter, slower. They moved not with the ticking of clocks, but with the soft falling of snow, the low hum of wind across rooftops, the gentle crackle of fire. And perhaps that's something we've forgotten, that winter was once not something to avoid, but something to endure together. A shared story, a long breath of silence. Tonight, as you fall deeper into rest, imagine lying beneath those heavy blankets. Listen to the fire's whisper. Let your heart beat slow like the snow falling outside an old wooden window. This is how they made it through. One night at a time. One story at a time. Let us go further now, deeper into the frost-laced corners of time. As the wind outside howls through distant memory and the fires of tradition burn low but steady, we settle into yet another winter. This time, in the countryside of 17th century Scandinavia. In Norway, Sweden, and Finland, where the winters were long and dark, the people learned not to fight the cold, but to flow with it. The sun might not rise for weeks in the far north, and the days were brief even farther south. Life adapted to the rhythms of darkness. One of the central tools for surviving winter here was the hearth room, sometimes called a stuga or eldhus. These were compact, well-insulated spaces with thick log walls, often smeared with clay and straw to keep out wind. A stone fireplace or stove stood in the center, and around it, life revolved like planets around a star. In these places, families spent nearly all their time during winter. The fire was always burning, carefully tended, feeding both warmth and safety. Meals were cooked, clothing was dried, tools were repaired, and stories were told beside the fire. Elders passed on folklore, weaving together threads of mythology, cautionary tales, and local wisdom. Children would listen, wrapped in woolen cloaks, half awake, the flicker of flames dancing in their eyes. Much like other regions, sleeping arrangements were communal and layered. In some Scandinavian homes, built-in beds called box beds were nestled into the walls. These small enclosures could be closed with wooden doors or thick curtains to trap heat inside, forming a miniature room within a room. People would sleep curled tightly together, dressed in wool, beneath layers of pelts, reindeer hides, sheep fleece, bear furs, whatever they could find or trade for. The clothes themselves were crafted with care: tunics, trousers, mittens, and socks made from felted wool or animal hides. The Sami people, native to the far north, wore gakti, traditional garments tailored for survival. These were made from reindeer leather and wool, sewn with special cuts to resist the wind, designed to be both beautiful and functional. Lighting was sparse. Candles made from animal fat were precious. Birch bark torches might flicker in the darker corners. But in truth, people learned to love the dark. It was the time of reflection, of quiet. Not everything needed light. Not everything needed speed. Their food reflected that stillness. Root cellars stored turnips, carrots, and potatoes beneath the frozen earth. Fish were smoked or dried, and meat salted or buried in snow-packed boxes. Grains were ground by hand and baked into flatbreads or porridges. Winter meals were repetitive but filling, and the ritual of preparing them gave structure to the otherwise slow days. Now picture a winter's evening, deep in Lapland. Outside, the snow falls silently over an endless field of white. Aurora Borealis shimmers above like a green and purple river of dreams. Inside a tent made of stretched hides, a lavu, a small fire glows. Around it sit elders and children wrapped in hand-stitched furs, sipping warm broth. There are no clocks. No electric hum, just breath, fire, snow, and the old stories. Across the ocean in Japan, people also developed ways to survive harsh winters without modern heating. In mountainous regions, such as Tohoku, homes were often built with irori, a sunken hearth, in the middle of the floor filled with glowing charcoal and hung with kettles of soup or tea. Families would sit around the irori, feet tucked beneath them, sharing warmth and silence. Japanese winter clothing was made from thick cotton layers called hanten and tanzen, quilted jackets that resembled modern robes. These garments were often worn indoors as outerwear wasn't enough by itself. Hands and feet were wrapped with extra layers. And in some homes, hibachi, small charcoal heaters, would be carried from room to room like glowing lanterns of warmth. At bedtime, families slept beneath futons placed on mats of woven straw. To trap warmth, a thick quilt called a kakabutan would be laid over them, while underneath, a shikibutan cushioned the floor. In especially cold nights, some would sleep beside shikiri screens, or even pull the kotatsu, a heated table, over themselves and drift to sleep right there, legs still tucked beneath the warm cloth. And just like their European counterparts, the Japanese embraced the pace of winter. Activity slowed, time moved in gentle increments. Even the practice of watching snow, yukimi, became a kind of art. Sitting in silence and observing the snow as it fell was seen as beautiful, poetic, calming. As you drift now, let your breath slow with the snowflakes of ancient Japan. Let your body relax like a villager sitting beside the irori, sipping something warm, listening to the wind brush gently against paper walls. The cold was never an enemy. It was an invitation to draw closer, to the fire, to each other, and to the stillness of winter nights. There is no need to rush. The world outside can wait. The snow will fall whether we run or rest. And now, wrapped in layers of history and quiet, we rest too. In the stillness of an early winter morning, long before the sun rose over snow-covered hills, ancient people were already stirring. With no electricity, no central heating, and no weather forecast to rely on, they had only one guide to help them face the cold day ahead. Their instincts, passed down from generations of quiet, patient endurance. As the fire in the hearth began to fade during the night, the chill would creep in slowly. first through the cracks in the doors, then through the stones of the floor, and finally through the thin layers of woolen bedding. To keep warm through the night, families often slept in the same room or even in the same bed. Children would sleep between parents. Grandparents would share a sleeping space with grandchildren. It wasn't a matter of comfort or convenience. It was a matter of survival. In Northern Europe, places like Scandinavia, where the winter sun barely touched the horizon, homes were often dug partially into the earth. These semi-subterranean homes were known for their insulation. The ground helped to trap warmth and reduce exposure to wind. The beds were low and small, often just wide enough to fit 2 people tightly. Layers of furs were laid on top. Not the fluffy furs seen in films, but practical, heavy hides from animals, hunted for food. Sometimes people even slept in their clothes. They'd go to bed wearing their daytime garments, woolen tunics, thick socks, and felt hats, ensuring that the cold wouldn't bite them awake before dawn. Daily routines adjusted naturally to the season. People slept longer, moved slower, and adapted their lives to the shortened daylight. Instead of trying to fight the dark, they welcomed it. Candles were precious and used sparingly, so darkness wasn't feared. It was accepted. Families would sit together and let the night unfold, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in silence. In feudal societies, peasants and farmers also had to think beyond their own survival. They had to keep livestock warm. Animals were often housed in structures attached to the family home, where their body heat would help warm the living quarters. Cows, goats, and chickens, the quiet sounds of their breathing and movement would lull families to sleep while protecting them from the bitter temperatures outside. Clothing, too, played a vital role in managing winter. People didn't change clothes often. Instead, they wore the same thick layers for days, sometimes weeks at a time. Wool was the most common fabric. It was durable, it insulated even when damp, and it could be layered easily. Scarves, mittens, hoods, and cloaks completed the ensemble, especially when venturing outdoors for chores. And while many today warm their homes with thermostats and hot air, people of the past relied on simple, time-tested techniques. They would place hot stones by the fire and wrap them in cloth before tucking them under blankets. These stones would radiate heat for hours. Some families boiled water and filled animal skin pouches, creating the earliest versions of hot water bottles. In some regions, beds were built high off the floor to avoid drafts. The higher the bed, the warmer the air, since heat rises. In other places, straw-filled mattresses were placed directly on the ground, layered with thick textiles and furs to insulate against the cold earth. And food, so important, so vital, took on a central role in managing the cold months. People ate not just to feel full, but to stay warm from the inside out. In mountainous regions, dense broths made with bones, barley, and root vegetables simmered all day. These soups and stews provided essential fats and nutrients, designed not for pleasure but for endurance. There were no microwaves, no grocery deliveries, and no refrigerators. Food had to be preserved. Meat was salted and hung in cellars. Vegetables were pickled or buried in the earth. Cheese, butter, and grains were stored in tightly sealed containers. Every meal was the product of planning and patience. As the snow fell softly outside, people turned to routine for comfort. Chores, no matter how small, gave rhythm to the days. Tending to the fire, spinning yarn, sharpening tools, repairing shoes. These weren't just tasks. They were acts of survival and quiet determination. And now, as we transition into the next part of our journey through winter history, let your thoughts settle like falling snow. The fire is still burning. The hearth still crackles. The wind may howl outside, but you are safe here, wrapped in memory and warmth, ready for a deeper, slower rhythm of life. Let your thoughts now wander slowly to the misty highlands of Scotland. Imagine the rugged hills blanketed in frost, with icy winds rolling across moors and valleys. In these parts of the world, where the winters were damp, gray, and deeply bone-chilling, ancient communities found creative ways to endure the cold and carry on with life. Stone cottages with thick walls and small windows were common. These homes, built from local materials, were tightly packed with heather, moss, and even animal dung between the stones to block drafts. The roofs were often thatched, providing insulation against the elements. These homes weren't grand or spacious, but they were sturdy and warm in their own quiet way. Inside, the hearth once again became the soul of the home. A large open fireplace, sometimes taking up nearly an entire wall, was used for both heating and cooking. Above it hung an iron pot, blackened by years of stews and porridges. The family would gather around it, often huddled on wooden benches with woolen shawls wrapped tightly over their shoulders. Beds were placed in corners, away from windows and doors. And to preserve warmth, heavy drapes or thick wooden panels could be pulled closed around the sleeping area. These sleeping nooks were small, intentionally so, to allow body heat to linger and create a cocoon of warmth even in the chill of night. Scottish winters were marked by a diet designed to fuel the body through the cold. Oats were a staple. They were used to make porridge in the morning and oatcakes throughout the day. Root vegetables like neeps and tatties, turnips and potatoes, were boiled or mashed, and often eaten with salted fish or smoked meat. The meals were simple but hearty, often made in large batches to minimize time away from the fire. To keep warm during chores, clothing was layered and layered again. Woolen underclothes, thick socks, heavy skirts, and woven shawls were worn, indoors and out. Feet were kept warm with shoes lined with straw or fur, and hands wrapped in mitts made from the hides of sheep or deer. But warmth came not just from fire and fabric, it came from ritual. Winter was a time of storytelling. Long nights were softened by the gentle murmur of tales passed from one generation to the next. Ghost stories, folklore, legends of selkies and forest spirits whispered softly in candlelight as wind pressed against the walls. Further west, in the remote countryside of Ireland, similar customs endured. One of the cleverest winter adaptations was the settlebed, a wooden bench during the day that transformed into a bed at night. These beds were often placed near the hearth, the warmest spot in the cottage. A wooden canopy and thick curtains would be drawn to trap in heat, and families would sleep together, listening to the crackle of turf fires. Turf, or peat, was an essential part of winter survival in Ireland. Cut from the boglands, dried, and stacked for months in advance, it became the main fuel source during the colder seasons. Unlike wood, peat burned slowly and released a steady, calming heat, perfect for long, slow winters. In parts of Eastern Europe, in rural Poland, Hungary, and the Balkans, winters could be even more brutal. But again, the people endured. Homes were designed with thick plastered walls, low ceilings, and small rooms. In many villages, there was a special kind of stove called a cachalófan, a ceramic tiled oven that held heat for hours after the fire had gone out. Children would curl up beside it, or even on top of specially built benches surrounding it, letting the stored warmth seep into their bones. Food here was equally important for survival. Pickled vegetables, fermented cabbage, sausages cured in smokehouses, and bread baked in large batches. These foods sustained entire families for weeks. In cold climates, every bite mattered. Every calorie was a defense against the cold. One of the most intriguing practices in these regions was the crafting of sheepskin coats, long, heavy, and often passed down through generations. These garments were not just clothing but shields against the harshest winds, snow, and frost. They were worn not only outdoors but even indoors in homes that lacked insulation. Embroidered, repaired, and cherished, they became part of a person's identity. Let yourself imagine now a winter evening in an old Balkan village. The snow has fallen silently for hours. Icicles hang from every roof like frozen daggers, but inside all is calm. A grandmother wraps a sleeping child in a woolen blanket beside the cachalófan. A pot of thick soup simmers gently, the smell of garlic and cabbage hanging in the air. Outside, the wind sings to the pines. Inside, there is peace. These moments weren't loud or exciting, but they were real. They were life, held together with warmth, love, and resilience. Now as you rest, let your mind linger in one of those quiet cottages. The fire still glows, The snow still falls, and the long dark night is nothing to fear, only something to surrender to softly and slowly. As the centuries passed, different regions developed their own unique approaches to coping with winter's long, cold grip. In Eastern Europe, the use of clay ovens became central to winter survival. These enormous, thick-walled stoves, often called pechka or kacheloven, were more than just tools for cooking. They were the heart of the home. Unlike modern ovens, these massive structures retained heat for hours after the fire was extinguished. People would often climb onto or sleep beside them, basking in their gentle warmth long into the night. It wasn't uncommon for an elderly family member or a child to sleep directly on top of the oven, not because it was particularly soft, but because it was the warmest place in the entire house. Life revolved around it. Bread was baked in it. Meals were cooked in its coals. Clothes were dried near it. And in the darkest hours of winter, stories were told beside it, softly, quietly, under flickering candlelight. In the highlands of Scotland, the traditional black houses, thick-walled, homes made of stone with thatched roofs, were another answer to the cold. These structures had no chimney. Instead, the smoke from a peat fire filled the interior, slowly escaping through the thatch. Though it may seem unpleasant today, the smoke had a purpose. It killed insects, preserved wooden beams, and helped warm the home. People and livestock lived under the same roof, separated only by a simple wall or wooden partition. The body heat of animals, cattle, sheep, goats, helped keep the living area from freezing. Winters were not only physical challenges, they were mental ones. Without television, phones, or digital distractions, people turned inward. Time slowed. Reading, where possible, became an escape, though books were rare and expensive. In wealthier homes, volumes of poetry and prayer were read aloud by candlelight. In poorer cottages, stories were passed down by voice, slow tales that meandered through the cold nights like a drifting snowflake. Tales of ancestors, spirits, gods, and harsh winters long past. In parts of Asia, winter meant a return to layered traditions, both literally and figuratively. In Japan, the kotatsu, a low table covered by a heavy blanket with a heat source underneath, was a centerpiece of family life. People would gather around it, legs tucked underneath, sometimes staying there for hours. Meals were eaten there, games were played, and naps were taken, all while warmth was preserved beneath the fabric. In Korea, homes featured ondol heating systems, an ingenious floor heating method where flues beneath the floor carried warm air from a stove. The result was a toasty floor to sit and sleep on. Rather than heating the entire house, this method focused on where warmth was most needed, under the body. People slept close to the ground, nestled into the heat, and across the globe, in indigenous communities of North America, the winter season was treated as a time of stillness and reflection. In many Arctic regions, people lived in semi-permanent snow houses or igloos. These weren't cold, quite the opposite. The compressed snow created insulation, trapping body heat inside. Furs lined the floor. Lamps made from carved stone burned. Seal oil, providing both light and warmth. Life moved slowly. Every action, lighting a lamp, sewing a coat, boiling water, had a weight and a purpose. Language shifted in winter. Voices lowered, steps softened. Even laughter felt muffled, as if the snow itself asked for quiet. The world outside was dangerous, but inside was sacred, a place of shared breath and flickering flame. People adapted. They didn't conquer the cold. They didn't fight it with roaring machines or digital thermostats. They lived alongside it, listened to it, and shaped their routines around its rhythm. And in doing so, they left behind a tapestry of knowledge, little details, quiet habits, small tricks, that remind us how human beings have always found a way. Now, as you rest in the quiet warmth of your own space, try to imagine that same stillness. A room lit only by firelight. A blanket of snow outside. The slow crackle of a log giving in to flame. The rhythm of breath shared between people who depended on each other, not just for warmth but for presence. Sleep in those days wasn't taken for granted. It was earned after long days of labor, protected by ritual, and honored as a moment of peace between the struggles of survival. Let that spirit carry you now, into your own sleep, one that connects you, gently and softly, with the countless winters that came before. As winter deepened, many societies developed intricate ways to prepare not just for survival, but for sustaining some measure of comfort and routine. In the coldest months, predictability became a kind of security. People counted the shortening and lengthening of daylight, watched the frost form in familiar patterns on the window panes or walls, and knew which tasks belonged to which days. This quiet routine was in itself a defense against the winter's emotional weight. In medieval monasteries, winters were met with a deepening of spiritual practice. These stone-built sanctuaries, often surrounded by snow-covered fields and silence, became even more inward during the colder months. Monks rose before dawn, their breath visible in the unheated halls, cloaked in wool, and walked to the chapel in near darkness. There, by candlelight, they chanted prayers, their voices, slow and solemn, echoing softly off the stone walls. Though the chill bit at their fingers and faces, they carried on, drawing strength from repetition and rhythm. In the evenings, a monk might sit with a book of illuminated manuscripts, hands tucked into sleeves, reading with care and intention. These long, silent nights were not wasted. They were opportunities for reflection, for writing, for copying texts that would last centuries. And throughout these quiet hours, the sounds were always minimal. The scratching of a quill, the occasional whisper of turning parchment, and outside, the wind. Farmhouses throughout northern Europe relied on simple but effective systems of insulation. Straw was not only used as feed or bedding, it was also a crucial part of human comfort. People would lay bundles of straw beneath beds, inside walls, and even pack it around window frames. Feather beds and wool blankets were treasured items. Often, a family shared one bed, layered beneath multiple covers. Children slept nestled between adults, all huddled together in a shared body heat. They called it top and tail sleeping, where one child would sleep with their head at one end of the bed and another at the opposite end, to avoid breathing into each other's faces. In drafty houses with icy floors, these small adjustments made all the difference. Evening meals were heavy and warm, designed to fuel the body through long freezing nights. Porridges thick with grains and fats. Root vegetables stewed for hours. Meats preserved through smoking or salting. And in places where food was scarcer, people relied on what they had stored. Dried beans, jars of pickled cabbage, smoked fish wrapped tightly in cloth and kept in cellars that smelled of earth and stone. There was a particular kind of patience required in these months. The kind of patience that only comes when there is no choice. Waiting for snow to melt. Waiting for the sun to return. Waiting for the ground to thaw so the planting could begin again. And in the meantime, winter became a time of mending. Not just of tools and clothes, but of thoughts. Conversations were deeper. Silences were longer. People listened to each other more. In the far reaches of Scandinavia, the Sami people, skilled reindeer herders, followed migratory paths through snow-covered forests and open tundra. Their tents, called lavu, were simple but effective. Shelters. Inside, a fire burned constantly, and reindeer hides were spread on the floor for insulation. They wore fur-lined garments and layered leather boots, made not for style but for survival. The Sami knew the land in a way few others did. They knew when a storm was coming by the way the wind moved through the trees. They knew which mosses could feed reindeer, even under snow. They sang joiks, melodic, wordless songs, to honor nature, animals, memories. These songs filled the still air, sometimes in solitude, sometimes in company, always slowly. As you imagine these lives, cloaked in snow, wrapped in silence, lit by flickering flame, you begin to understand that winter was not merely endured, it was embraced. It was transformed into something sacred through rhythm, through ritual, through the passing down of knowledge that whispered, "This is how we survive." Let that thought rest gently in your mind. Let it settle like snow on a quiet roof. The world was not always loud, not always fast. Sometimes the best way to make it through was to simply pause and breathe and wait. Throughout history, winter was more than just a season. It was a test, a slow-moving trial of endurance, ingenuity, and patience. And yet, across cultures and continents, people found subtle, almost poetic ways to adapt. One such adaptation came not in the form of tools, but in the rituals of light. In regions like Northern Europe and Russia, where the sun might vanish for days or even weeks, people turned inward and upward. They made use of oil lamps, simple clay or iron vessels. With a wick soaked in animal fat or whale oil, the light was dim, flickering, but precious. A single flame, placed in the center of a cold room, could feel like a companion. Shadows danced on the walls, creating quiet entertainment in the absence of other distractions. And so, an entire family might sit in near silence, watching the glow as if it were telling stories of its own. In Japan, traditional winter living spaces took on a unique form. The kotatsu was a small table covered with a thick blanket, under which a heat source was placed. Once a charcoal brazier, and in modern times, a small electric heater. Families would sit with their legs tucked beneath the warmth, sometimes napping there, sometimes reading or mending clothing. Outside, the wind might howl through bare branches, but inside, beneath the kotatsu, it was a world of stillness and soft murmurs. Even earlier, in the Edo period, Japanese homes were built with flexibility in mind. Thick paper walls, shoji, could be moved to trap in heat or let in light. Straw mats lined the floors. Layers of kimono were worn indoors, and hot tea was not just a beverage, but a balm against the chill. Winter became a kind of still art, quiet, restrained, and deeply intentional. Far to the west, in the Andean highlands of South America, indigenous communities had long mastered winter through elevation and efficiency. At heights where snow and cold were a daily reality, homes were made of stone and insulated with thick thatch. Llamas and alpacas were not only companions but also sources of warmth. Their wool was spun into dense textiles, vibrant in color but deeply functional. Meals were shared communally, often featuring chuño, freeze-dried potatoes made using a method perfected by the Inca. These preserved foods ensured that winter, though harsh, did not bring hunger. And more importantly, stories, talkas, were told as people sat wrapped in hand-woven blankets. Tales of mountains, of ancestors, of the spirits who guarded the cold. These stories weren't only entertainment, they were how memory survived. The snow. Meanwhile, in the villages of Eastern Europe, the concept of a pechka, a large masonry stove, dominated winter architecture. These massive brick ovens heated entire homes. Some were so large that people slept directly on them, lying on the warm stone or surrounding benches. Firewood was precious, so fires were maintained with great care. Each log added sparingly, every ember preserved with patience. Children listened to folktales beside the heat, cheeks red from the cold, eyes drooping from the stillness of night. Across different eras and locations, winter was never passive. People did not simply wait for it to pass. They built winter lives, winter spaces, and winter minds. They grew used to the slow pace, the quiet routines, the softness of snow falling outside while inside, life beat slowly but steadily, like a heart at rest. Clothing, too, was a language of winter survival. In ancient Mongolia, nomads wore layered garments made of felted wool, leather, and fur. These weren't just functional, they were symbols of identity and craftsmanship. Gloves with split fingers for gripping reins, hats that tied under the chin to protect against icy winds that raced across the steppe, and boots, lined with fur, stuffed with straw, wrapped in leather. Nothing was wasted. Every part of the animal had a use, every stitch a purpose. In such societies, sleep itself took on a different rhythm. With less daylight and fewer chores, people slept in 2 shifts, a first sleep and a second sleep, with an hour or 2 of wakefulness in between. They would talk quietly, pray, tend the fire, or reflect, and then sleep again. This segmented rest was normal, even welcome. Winter, it seemed, gave time back, not to spend, but to savor. So as you lie still now, breathing softly, consider this. Long ago, people greeted the cold, not with fear, but with method, with rhythm, with tradition. You are part of that lineage, part of the long human story of lighting a candle against the dark and waiting calmly for the return of the sun. Winter's challenges extended beyond just warmth and shelter. Water, a simple necessity today, once required careful planning. In ancient times, when rivers froze and wells turned to ice, people developed creative ways to ensure a steady supply. In Scandinavia, for example, early villagers collected snow and ice during the day, storing it in insulated pits lined with straw or moss. These natural refrigerators kept the ice from melting for weeks, sometimes months. At night, they would melt portions over a small fire, using the water sparingly. This process required patience and respect. Water was not something to be wasted, especially when winter's grip was tight. Similarly, in Native American cultures such as the Inuit, snow itself was a source of water, but it wasn't simply eaten as is. They built ingenious tools and methods for melting snow safely, often heating stones in fire and placing them into containers to melt snow more efficiently. This careful handling prevented sudden drops in body temperature that could occur from eating snow directly. In more temperate parts of the world, such as medieval England, water management had its own challenges. Wells would sometimes freeze, and rainwater collection systems had to be relied upon. People might store water in barrels inside cellars, protected from freezing by Earth's insulation. During heavy snowfall, water was often collected from melting snow and then boiled for use. The necessity of managing water carefully was part of the larger pattern of winter survival. Every resource conserved, every task deliberate. It was not only about endurance, but about respect for nature's slow rhythms. Food preservation was another vital practice. Before refrigerators or freezers, winter meant scarcity. Yet humans developed various methods to stretch their supplies. In parts of Eastern Europe and Russia, for example, root cellars dug deep into the earth kept vegetables like turnips, carrots, and beets fresh throughout the cold months. The cool, humid environment slowed decay. These cellars were simple holes lined with stones or wood, yet they were lifelines against starvation. People also dried or smoked meats to preserve them. In Native American societies, bison meat was often sun-dried into pemmican, a dense, energy-packed food made from dried meat mixed with fat and sometimes berries. This portable sustenance was crucial for winter hunts or long travels. In Japan, fermentation was a key technique. Foods like miso and pickled vegetables could be stored for months, providing vital nutrition when fresh produce was unavailable. The process itself was slow and delicate, a quiet science passed down through generations. Even honey, with its natural preservative qualities, was treasured. It lasted through winters without spoiling and was often used as both a sweetener and a medicinal remedy. As the days shortened, people adapted their activities to the limits of daylight. Work outside became minimal, and indoor tasks gained importance. Families spent more time sewing, weaving, or crafting tools. Storytelling, music, and quiet companionship filled the evenings. In some cultures, winter festivals marked this slow season. These celebrations provided hope and social connection. For example, in ancient Rome, the festival of Saturnalia brought light and joy in the darkest days, with feasts, gift-giving, and the reversal of social roles, if only briefly. These traditions reminded people that even the harshest winter was temporary. In the end, winter was a teacher, teaching patience, humility, and the beauty of simple things. A fire's glow, the softness of layered blankets, the warmth of a shared meal. It was a time to slow down, to rest, and to prepare for the renewal that would come with spring. So, as you continue to rest now, imagine the quiet houses of long ago, the slow drip of melting ice, the steady flicker of candlelight. Let the history of winter's management lull you into calm, knowing that, like countless generations before you, you are part of a timeless cycle of endurance and renewal. One of the quietest, yet most crucial adaptations to winter in many ancient cultures was the design of their homes. Shelter was not merely about walls and roofs, but about creating a sanctuary from the cold, wind, and snow. In many traditional societies, homes were built with a deep understanding of local climate and materials. For instance, the Inuit igloo is a remarkable example of ingenious winter shelter. Made from blocks of compacted snow, the igloo's dome shape helps trap body heat inside while resisting the fierce Arctic winds outside. Snow paradoxically acts as an excellent insulator. Inside, temperatures could rise well above freezing, a stark contrast to the harsh cold just beyond the entrance. In contrast, in the dense forests of northern Europe, longhouses served as communal living spaces for families and livestock alike. These long, narrow wooden structures were built with thick thatched roofs and walls of timber, often packed with moss or clay for insulation. A central hearth provided warmth, cooking, and a gathering place. The smoke slowly escaping through the roof also helped deter pests and kept insects at bay during the warmer months. Meanwhile, in the dry, mountainous regions of the American Southwest, indigenous peoples built adobe houses. Made from sun-dried earth mixed with straw, adobe walls were thick and stored heat from the sun during the day, releasing it slowly after dark. This natural thermal mass helped balance the temperature swings between cold nights and warmer days. Roofs were flat and made of timber and brush, often covered with earth, further insulating the home. The design of homes across the world reflected a deep relationship with the environment, a quiet respect for nature's patterns. People learned to work with the land, using available resources to create spaces of comfort and safety amid the challenges of winter. Within these homes, life adapted to the slow rhythm of the season. People layered their clothing indoors, wore thick woolen socks and mittens, and wrapped themselves in blankets woven from animal fibers. The art of layering was more than fashion. It was survival. Children, too, learned early how to stay warm. They might wear hand-knit hats and scarves, sometimes passed down from parents or grandparents. Small mittens, often decorated with patterns, meaningful to the family or community, kept tiny hands protected. At night, sleeping arrangements were carefully planned. In some cultures, people slept close together to share body heat. Mats or furs were laid on wooden frames or earthen floors. In cold regions, the warmest family members would be positioned near the center of the sleeping area. Even the timing of daily activities shifted. Without electric lights, people rose with the sun and settled down soon after dusk. Evening hours were quiet, devoted to simple, calming tasks, mending clothing, storytelling, or preparing food for the next day. Despite the hardships, winter was not merely endured but embraced as a season of rest and reflection. The quiet stillness allowed for moments of contemplation, fostering a connection to nature and community that modern life often overlooks. So, as you settle deeper into calm now, think of these ancient homes, their fires softly glowing, their walls holding warmth, their inhabitants wrapped in layers of care. Imagine the slow passage of winter nights, where patience and presence were as essential as blankets and hearths. Winter's challenges extended far beyond shelter and warmth. Food scarcity during the cold months forced communities to develop ingenious strategies for storage and preservation. In many parts of the world, harvests were carefully timed to ensure enough food would last through the winter. Root vegetables, grains, and dried fruits were staples that could be stored for months without spoiling. People created storage pits, cellars, or cool underground rooms to keep these provisions safe from frost and pests. In Northern Europe, for example, people used underground root cellars lined with straw and wooden shelves. These spaces remained cool, but above freezing, preserving carrots, potatoes, onions, and cabbages throughout the season. Such cellars were communal assets in some villages, carefully maintained and guarded. Drying and smoking meats were also common. Preservation methods. Hunters and herders would prepare large quantities of meat during autumn, then cure or smoke it to ensure it remained edible for winter. This process not only prevented spoilage but also intensified the flavors, creating delicacies that were eagerly awaited during the cold months. In East Asia, fermentation was a key technique. Fermented vegetables, fish, and soy products such as kimchi and miso provided vital nutrition and probiotics, aiding digestion and health through the long winter. These foods were not only preserved but also transformed, gaining complexity and richness over time. Honey was another natural preservative treasured across cultures. Its antibacterial properties meant it could store well beyond the winter months, providing sweetness and healing properties when fresh fruits were unavailable. People also collected and stored seeds carefully. Protecting the seeds for next year's planting was crucial, requiring safe, dry, and cool conditions. This cyclical preparation reflected a deep understanding of the natural world's rhythms, the promise of growth following rest. Hunting and fishing adapted with the seasons as well. In winter, frozen lakes and rivers were common hunting grounds for those skilled enough to navigate ice and snow. Ice fishing, for example, was practiced in many cold regions, where small holes were cut into thick ice to catch fish beneath the surface. This method required patience and skill, but was vital for supplementing food stores. Gathering firewood was another crucial task before winter fully set in. Families and communities worked together to collect, split, and stack wood in well-ventilated shelters. Properly dried wood burned hotter and longer, providing the warmth essential for survival. The preparation was often a social event, with stories and songs shared as people worked side by side. The cycle of preparation, preservation, and patience was a defining rhythm of life. It taught resilience and foresight, values still relevant today. As you continue to drift deeper into calm, imagine the slow, steady work of those who prepared for winter long ago. The gentle crackle of firewood stacked high, the careful sorting of root vegetables in cool cellars, the quiet patience of fishermen waiting by frozen lakes. Let this quiet history of winter management ease your mind and soothe your spirit, wrapping you gently in the timeless cycle of seasons, endurance, and renewal. As winter deepened, the social rhythms of communities adjusted to the season's demands. Life became quieter and more inward-focused, fostering bonds strengthened by shared challenges and communal care. In many cultures, winter was a time for gathering, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. People came together around fires to share stories, songs, and traditions passed down through generations. These moments of connection were vital in combating the isolation that cold, dark days could bring. In Scandinavia, for example, the long winter nights were often illuminated by the warm glow of candles and lanterns. Families gathered in the main room, weaving tales of heroes, gods, and nature spirits. These stories were not only entertainment but also a way to teach values and history, linking past and present in a comforting continuity. Similarly, in many Native American cultures, winter was a time of ceremonial gatherings and storytelling. Elders shared wisdom and legends, while younger members listened attentively, learning about their identity and the natural world. These communal rituals reinforced social bonds and provided a shared sense of purpose and hope during the season's hardships. The practice of communal work was also common. Neighbors helped each other with essential tasks like chopping wood, repairing homes, or tending to livestock. This cooperation was vital for survival, weaving a network of mutual support. Winter festivals often marked these gatherings, offering moments of celebration amid the cold. Yule in Northern Europe, for example, was a midwinter festival that combined feasting, gift-giving, and rituals to welcome the returning sun. These events punctuated the season's monotony, infusing it with joy and anticipation. Even daily routines shifted to accommodate the shorter daylight hours. People often rose later and went to bed earlier, aligning their schedules with the sun's natural cycle. Meals were simple but hearty, designed to provide energy and warmth. Stews made from preserved meats and root vegetables were common, simmered slowly over the hearth. Despite the harsh conditions, winter cultivated a sense of patience and introspection. The slow pace encouraged reflection, creativity, and planning for the coming spring. Many crafts, such as weaving, carving, and toolmaking, were practiced indoors during this time, sustaining skills and culture. As you relax further, picture these warm communal spaces filled with laughter, song, and the soft flicker of firelight. Imagine the quiet strength found in shared stories and the comfort of being surrounded by loved ones, all weathering winter together. Let the steady heartbeat of these ancient winter traditions lull you deeper into peace. A gentle reminder of humanity's enduring resilience and the simple power of connection. With winter's arrival, clothing became one of the most critical aspects of survival. Without modern insulation or synthetic fabrics, people relied on natural materials carefully prepared to keep the cold at bay. Animal hides and furs were the primary sources of warmth. Early humans developed the skill to tan and soften skins, transforming them into durable garments that could shield against biting winds and icy temperatures. These garments were layered strategically, trapping heat close to the body. In Arctic and subarctic regions, indigenous peoples like the Inuit crafted exquisite clothing from sealskin, caribou hide, and other furs. The design was not only practical, but also ingeniously suited to the extreme cold, with tight seams to prevent heat loss and hoods lined with fur to protect the face. In Europe and Asia, wool became a vital resource. Sheep were among the earliest. Domesticated animals, and their wool was spun into yarn and woven into thick fabrics. Wool's natural crimp allowed it to trap air, providing excellent insulation even when damp. Layering was key. People wore multiple garments, tunics, cloaks, leggings, and mittens to build a barrier against the cold. Accessories like woolen hats and scarves protected the head and neck where much heat could escape. Footwear also reflected deep knowledge of winter conditions. In many cultures, boots were made from sewn-together animal skins and insulated with moss, grass, or fur. These natural insulators kept feet dry and warm during long treks through snow and ice. Preparing and maintaining these garments was a time-consuming process. Skins had to be cleaned, dried, and softened. Wool needed to be carded and spun. This labor was often done in winter months when outdoor work was limited, turning cold days into productive periods. The crafting of winter clothing was both necessity and art. Decorative patterns, stitching techniques, and the use of natural dyes reflected cultural identity and status. Some communities passed down these techniques through generations, preserving heritage alongside survival skills. This intimate relationship with nature's resources exemplified a deep understanding of environment and necessity. Every stitch and layer represented knowledge born from centuries of experience. As you settle into calm, picture the careful hands working late by firelight, softening hides and spinning wool. Feel the warmth of these ancient clothes enveloping you like a protective embrace, a testament to human ingenuity and care. Let the quiet rhythm of these winter preparations ease your mind, inviting rest and warmth into your night. As the cold deepened, the ways people kept their homes warm were essential to survival. Without modern heating systems, they had to rely on clever architectural designs and natural resources to maintain comfort during winter's chill. One common feature in many ancient homes was the central hearth, a fire pit located at the heart of the dwelling. This hearth was the primary source of heat and also used for cooking. Its placement allowed warmth to radiate evenly throughout the space. In colder regions, homes were often built partially underground or with thick walls made from earth, stone, or packed snow. These materials had excellent insulating properties, retaining heat generated inside while blocking the icy winds outside. Examples include the sod houses of northern Europe and the igloos of the Arctic. Chimneys and smoke holes were ingeniously designed to vent smoke while minimizing heat loss. Some cultures developed smokehouses or separate cooking huts to keep living areas cleaner and warmer. Windows, if present, were small and covered with animal skins, oiled paper, or cloth to reduce drafts. Curtains made from thick fabric or fur further helped to trap heat. Floor coverings were vital for comfort and warmth. Straw, rushes, or animal skins were laid over cold floors, creating a barrier against the frozen ground. People also used heavy blankets, mats, and tapestries hung on walls to retain heat and reduce cold drafts. These coverings often displayed intricate patterns and bright colors, adding beauty to practical function. Many homes had a dedicated sleeping area, often a raised platform or bed made from wood and piled with soft furs and blankets. This elevation kept sleepers away from the cold floor and drafts. The collective effort to keep homes warm reflected deep understanding of materials and environment. These architectural and design choices were passed down through generations, evolving with experience and necessity. Imagine yourself nestled in one of these ancient homes. The soft glow of firelight flickers on thick walls, shadows dancing quietly. The air is cool, but the hearth's warmth gently embraces the space. Around you, thick blankets and skins provide comfort as the world outside sleeps under snow and ice. Let this vision of cozy resilience bring you calm and ease. Allow the warmth of ancient homes to wrap around you like a gentle, protective blanket as you drift deeper into rest. Food preservation was a cornerstone of winter survival long before refrigeration. As fresh produce and meat became scarce in the colder months, people developed ingenious methods to store and protect their food for extended periods. One of the oldest techniques was drying. Meats, fish, fruits, and herbs were carefully dried in the sun or over low heat by the fire. Removing moisture prevented spoilage by bacteria and mold, allowing these foods to last through the harshest winters. Smoking was another effective preservation method. By hanging meats and fish over smoky fires, people not only dried the food, but infused it with chemicals from the smoke that inhibited bacterial growth. This technique was widespread in many cultures and provided a rich, smoky flavor as well. Salting was a common practice as well. Salt draws moisture out of food, creating an environment where harmful microbes cannot thrive. Large quantities of salt were often stored, making it a precious commodity. In some regions, salt was even traded as currency. Fermentation played a key role in preserving vegetables and dairy. Sauerkraut, kimchi, and other fermented foods offered essential nutrients and variety to winter diets. Fermentation also enhanced digestion and boosted immunity during times of limited fresh food. Root. Cellars and cold storage were vital for keeping fruits, vegetables, and even dairy products fresh. These underground chambers maintained stable, cool temperatures and humidity, slowing spoilage. Families often stocked root cellars with potatoes, carrots, turnips, apples, and onions. Honey and wax were used to seal and protect perishable items, extending their shelf life. Some cultures stored food in sealed containers coated with beeswax or buried in snow to maintain cool conditions. Winter food preparations were often communal events, bringing families and neighbors together. The preservation process was labor-intensive but necessary, fostering cooperation and knowledge sharing. Visualize the careful work of drying meat strips over smoky fires, the smell of salted fish hanging in the air, and barrels full of fermenting cabbage quietly bubbling in cool cellars. These time-honored practices ensured that even in the coldest months, nourishment was available. Let this steady rhythm of preservation and preparation settle your mind. Feel the quiet patience and care embedded in these ancient traditions as you sink deeper into relaxation. Water, a vital resource, posed unique challenges during winter's freeze. Without modern plumbing or heating, people had to be resourceful to ensure a steady supply of fresh water despite ice and snow. In many regions, natural springs and streams provided water, but these could freeze solid or become inaccessible. To combat this, people learned to collect and store water before the deep freeze set in. Large clay or wooden containers were filled and kept inside homes or shelters to prevent freezing. Snow and ice themselves were valuable sources of water. Melting snow indoors over a fire or on heated stones was a common practice, providing liquid water for drinking, cooking, and washing. This process required patience, as heating snow slowly prevented wasting precious fuel. In some areas, wells were dug deep enough to reach unfrozen groundwater. These wells were carefully maintained and sometimes covered to prevent contamination or freezing at the surface. Ice harvesting was a specialized activity in colder climates. Large blocks of ice were cut from frozen lakes and rivers during winter and stored in insulated ice houses packed with straw or sawdust. This ice could be used throughout the year for preservation and cooling. Water storage vessels were crafted from materials like clay, wood, or animal skins. These containers were designed to minimize freezing and contamination. Some cultures developed innovative techniques, such as using double-walled containers or insulating coverings. During winter, water rationing was often necessary. People conserved water carefully, using it only for essential needs and recycling gray water for tasks like washing or watering animals. The challenge of water in winter influenced daily routines, social organization, and even cultural customs. Water gathering was often a communal activity, bringing people together in shared effort. Imagine the quiet patience of gathering snow from outside, carefully melting it by the fire, watching the water drip slowly into a pot. Feel the gentle warmth of this simple process, a small yet vital act of survival. Let this slow, steady rhythm of managing water in winter ease your mind. Picture the frozen landscape outside and inside, the soft glow of a fire melting snow, a quiet promise of refreshment and life. Clothing was one of the most crucial elements in enduring the harsh winter months. Without modern insulated fabrics or central heating, people relied heavily on layering and the materials available from their environment. Animal skins and furs were the primary sources of warmth. Communities skilled in hunting and trapping used the pelts of deer, rabbits, wolves, and bears, tailoring these into coats, leggings, hats, and gloves. These garments trapped body heat effectively and shielded wearers from biting winds. The inner layers often consisted of woven wool or linen. Wool was especially prized because of its natural insulating and moisture-wicking properties. Even when damp, wool could retain heat, which was vital during snowy or rainy days. Clothing was layered meticulously. Multiple garments were worn to create air pockets that provided insulation. People wrapped scarves or shawls tightly around their necks and faces to prevent heat loss. Footwear was adapted to the environment. Thick leather boots lined with fur protected feet from cold and moisture. In some cultures, people fashioned shoes from woven grasses or bark for additional insulation. Accessories like mittens, ear coverings, and fur-lined hoods were common to protect extremities vulnerable to frostbite. Some societies even used face masks or veils during blizzards to guard against frostbite and windburn. Crafting and maintaining winter clothing was a seasonal and communal activity. Preparing furs, tanning hides, and sewing garments took time, skill, and cooperation. These tasks were often passed down through generations as essential knowledge. Visualize the care and warmth of thick furs wrapped tightly, the soft texture of wool next to the skin, and the muffled crunch of snow beneath sturdy boots. Imagine the quiet preparation before stepping outside into the cold, the layers cocooning the body against winter's bite. Let this image of warm protection and thoughtful preparation soothe you. Feel wrapped in soft furs and cozy fabrics as you relax further, drifting into calmness and rest. Heating homes during winter was a constant challenge long before the convenience of modern furnaces and central heating systems. People relied on clever designs, natural materials, and steady fires to keep their shelters warm and livable. One common method was the hearth or open fire. Central to daily life, the hearth provided heat for cooking and warmth. The fire was carefully tended to maintain a steady glow, providing comfort throughout the cold nights. In many cultures, homes were built to maximize heat retention. Thick walls made of stone, earth, or packed snow insulated interiors from freezing temperatures. Some houses had small windows or none at all to prevent drafts. Smoke management was vital. Chimneys or smoke holes allowed smoke to escape without chilling the room too much. In some designs, smoke was directed through tunnels or around rooms to provide gentle warmth before venting outside. Heating stones were another technique. Large flat stones were heated in the fire and then brought indoors or placed near beds to radiate heat slowly during the night. This method provided gentle, lasting warmth without continuous fire. In cold climates, people sometimes constructed earth ovens or sunken pits within their homes. These spaces trapped warm air, creating cozy nooks to escape winter's chill. Community spaces like bathhouses or communal fires served as important warm gathering points during the cold months. People would come together to share heat, stories, and company. Visualize the flickering light of a steady fire, the comforting crackle of burning wood, and the soft glow radiating from warmed stones. Imagine the protective embrace of a thick-walled home, safe from icy winds outside. Let this scene of warmth and safety wrap around you like a soft blanket. Feel the steady, calming heat settle into your body and mind as you drift deeper into relaxation. As winter stretched on, people found ways to keep their spirits warm and minds engaged despite the long, cold nights. Storytelling, music, and quiet crafts became vital comforts that helped pass the time and maintain a sense of community. Families gathered close to the hearth, sharing tales passed down through generations, stories of ancestors, myths about the stars, and legends explaining the changing seasons. These narratives created bonds and a shared history, turning cold nights into cherished memories. Music, whether from simple instruments or voices raised in song, filled the quiet rooms with life. The rhythm of drums, the hum of stringed instruments, or the soft lullabies sung to children fostered warmth beyond the physical. Crafts such as knitting, weaving, carving, and pottery kept hands busy and minds focused. These skills were essential for creating clothing, tools, and household items, but also offered a meditative rhythm that soothed anxious thoughts. The slow pace of winter encouraged reflection and rest. People adapted to the natural cycle of the seasons, using the downtime to prepare for the months ahead, repair tools, and care for their homes. Imagine the soft flicker of firelight illuminating faces gathered in a circle, the gentle sound of storytelling weaving through the air, and the quiet focus of hands at work on delicate crafts. Feel the calm of shared warmth and quiet activity enveloping you. Let this peaceful scene close your day with comfort and ease. As your eyes grow heavy, know that you carry the quiet strength of those who faced winter long ago, resilient and calm, ready to rest and dream. Thank you for journeying through this calm exploration of winter's challenges and quiet solutions. If you watched until the end, please share in the comments how this story made you feel right now. Your thoughts and feelings are a valuable part of this quiet moment together.